Welcome to the Joanne Avison podcast. If you're new here, genuinely, warmly welcome. My name's Joanne Avison, and this is a podcast about fascia, movement, and the deeper intelligence of the living body. I call it bioemotional intelligence, and I love exploring why that makes so much sense to so many people. There's a lot here for you, and I'd encourage you when this episode is done to go back to the beginning and travel the journey that has brought us here. And if you're one of the people that's been here for a while, thank you. Thank you for coming back. And thank you especially for your questions and your comments, because this series exists because of you, and it's inspired by answering those comments from you. In a recent episode, and if you haven't heard it, I'm going to link it here, we explored sacred geometry as a living principle. What we looked at was how the body self-organises, how fascia is not packaging or wrapping, but the primary medium of embodiment, somatic embodiment, how life never, not once, organises itself in straight lines ever, and how we are not mechanical beings with levers and pin joints, but liquid crystal architectures in constant, intelligent, adaptive flux. And something else, we are round. It's such a big deal. Anyway, that sacred geometry piece inspired many, and something in that landed, because the questions that came back were not abstract. They were specific, they were curious, they were, and I'm paraphrasing here, but only slightly, what actually are the 5 Platonic volumes that you talk about. Can you explain them properly? What do they mean? How do they work? And why do they matter in the body? Please, could you describe them? So here we are. I'm keeping my promise to do exactly that. And this series is the answer to those questions. But before we get to the 5, before we can honestly meet any of them, we have to begin where all geometry begins. We have to begin with 0. Now, I know that sounds like a strange place to start. 0, nothing, the empty place. But stay with me, because 0 is not nothing. Or rather, 0 is the most important nothing there is. The word itself comes from the Sanskrit sunya. It means empty place, desert, naught. And for centuries, the Western world didn't have it. In the Western world, we had the Roman numeral system, which most of Europe used, with no symbol for 0. It started at 1. There was no concept of it. And without 0, certain things simply cannot be known. You cannot have negative and positive without the neutral between them. You cannot have +1 and -1 without the 0 that they live either side of. The opposites can only know themselves as opposites because of the nothing between them. Every opposite has an in-between. And this is not just mathematics. This is also something very profound about fascia. The fascia unites muscle and bone. It is neither muscle nor bone, strictly speaking, yet you could cogently argue that it's both. It is the third thing, the connecting, the differentiating, the organising field that forms the differentiating principle between them and actually allows them together to express our living unity. It's really important. And in some ways, fascia is, if you like, the 0, the non-thing that makes the other two possible, that allows them to know themselves as distinct while remaining part of the whole, the one whole. 0 is where we begin every time. That's not just my idea. That's the foundation of mathematics, and it's the very basis upon which computers can code. Everything in our modern world relies on 0. Not just the concept, but the implications of why it is so essential. Now, the symbol for 0 is a circle, a single round thing that is completely continuous. And the circle, in the ancient mathematical and philosophical traditions, represented the number 1. It's called the monad, the source of all, the source of all subsequent shapes. So where does that come from? The Greek word monad comes from monos, alone, single, singular, unique. But the Pythagoreans in ancient Greek times understood it as something far more than a unit. To them, it was symbolic of supreme being, the original force, the first force, the totality from which all other things proceed. The ancient philosophers noted that unity exists in all things, yet remains inapparent. Think about that for a minute. Just a moment. Remains inapparent. Unity exists in all things, yet remains inapparent. Consider when you multiply any number at all, be it a whole number, huge, millions, trillions, or a fraction of a whole number, if you multiply any number by 1, it remains unchanged. And that's not a spiritual sentiment dressed up in poetic language. It's a precise description of what fascia does. It is the original unity. It is present everywhere in the body. And it remains, for most people, inapparent until something goes wrong or until we learn to look. Embryologically, and this is something we will return to in depth in a later series, we begin as one, a unicellular being, according to Jaap van der Waal. A single spherical cell, the monad made literal, if you were to draw it in 2D render. It's a perfect geodesic whole. And from that one cell, that unicellular being, through principles of sacred geometry, everything we are emerges. The fascial matrix, the liquid crystal matrix of our whole architecture, arises from the in-between of the outer and the inner, the upper and the lower, the above and the below, combined in what will become you as a volume. That so-called middle layer that forms at the outset, it's called the mesoderm, but it isn't a layer or a derm. It is a neutral potential spatialization, which emerges from within that one whole conceptus, symbolized by the circle, but actually representing a sphere. And it contains the nucleus, in Sanskrit, the bindu, which becomes a tiny part of every part. Every single cell of your body derives from that original one. We begin as a circle, representing a sphere at the same time, or we could say we begin as a sphere represented as a circle in 2D. We begin as 0, as 1, simultaneously. So think about that for a moment. Feel into that for a whisper of presence, that exquisite centre, the null point in Blechschmidt's beautiful studies of the embryo forming. Consider the one divine essence, the invisible anima animus that denotes aliveness, and the force is there, silently animating the form that looks like a one, a monad, for a nanosecond, a light-filled moment of conception. Now, from 1 point, we move to 2, and from 2, we can move to 3. And it's here that something extraordinary happens, because 3 points define a flat surface, an area, a triangle. But it takes a 4th point to define depth or volume, to incorporate space. And that 4th point, that movement from surface into 3-dimensional volume, gives us the first of the 5 Platonic volumes, the Tetrahedron. 4 faces, 4 vertices, 6 edges, the simplest form that can exist in 3-dimensional space. And that is where our next episode begins. So this is what this whole series is. We're going to spend one episode with each of the 5 Platonic volumes, not rushing through them, not listing them as facts to memorise, but genuinely we're going to meet each one and understand its geometry, its elemental association, its archetypal character, and what it has to do with the living body that we inhabit. 5 more episodes, 5 volumes, 5 regular polyhedrons. And the first one is the tetrahedron, which represents fire. We have the hexahedron, the earth, the octahedron, air, the icosahedron, water, and the dodecahedron, ether. And I want to say one thing clearly before we go any further, because it matters to me so much. There are only 5 regular polyhedrons in nature. 5, a finite number. And we're going to meet all of them. 5 is the archetypal number associated with life. We have a seed, a tree, the flower, the fruit, and the seed. The 5 stages of essential forming to become a new life. The fascia, the living matrix of our bodies, expresses itself through irregular polyhedrons, and of those there are an infinite number. Jean-Claude Gamberto's extraordinary endoscopic work demonstrates this beautifully. He shows the polyhedral chaos of living tissue under the skin. Infinite variation, infinite adaptability, infinite aliveness, infinite ability to respond. The 5 regular volumes are the foundation, the grammar, if you like, and you might call geometry the algorithm of nature. The irregular, infinite ones are the language as it is actually spoken in all its variation and depth and genius and uniqueness by you in your body right now in this moment. Its syntax is shape. And one more thing before we close this opening episode. Just want to be clear that I'm not offering you answers here. I want to be really clear about that. What I'm offering is a foundation, a sort of lovely, inspiring blend, a ground of roundness that asks new questions that the body longs for us to ask. It's a vocabulary, it's a set of forms that have been understood by ancient sages, by mathematicians, by artists, by biologists, by movement practitioners, to be the structural code through which nature organises living matter. Let's not forget that nature is not even vaguely spellbound by the mechanical principles of philosophers who accidentally applied the logic of hard matter physics to living bodies and forms. I call it a big oops. It's the wrong physics to describe or understand human beings moving, or humans being. We're made of soft matter like all other living creatures on this planet, and what that means is that we move by different rules and laws of nature to the ones that we're trained in often. Every single one of us does that uniquely, and every shape we form in is archetypally unique to us, and that spell is being broken because it needs to be. Michael Schneider, whose work on the archetypes of numbers I return to again and again, describes numbers and shapes as the universal language of nature and art. Not a metaphor, a language with grammar, with precision, with meaning that can be felt in the body as well as understood by the mind and experienced as true when we understand this code, this ancient code, or the wisdom behind it. And what I've come to believe through 30 plus years of working with living bodies, through the fascia research, through the science, through work in the anatomy lab, and through my own practice in movement and manual therapy with literally thousands of individuals now, is that when we begin to understand this language, the codex behind it, something shifts. Something shifts in all of us. And that's not just an intellectual shift. It's a shift that takes place in our awareness. It occurs in the tissue. It comes about in the way we move, in the way we relate to ourselves, and the way we relate to each other. That is really what we're here for, to discover our own blueprint and get out of its way. We are not designed for stability. We humans are designed to be dynamically unstable. A tree is dynamically stable. Its roots hold, it's fixed, it sways, it responds to elements, yes, but it's anchored in a fundamentally stable relationship with the ground. A human being is the opposite of that. We are designed for dynamic instability, continuous, intelligent, responsive rebalancing in every moment. It's not a flaw in the design of humans being. That is the design. And as we're going to see throughout this series, the geometry of the living body reflects exactly that. Not locked forms, not static scaffolding, living, responsive, adaptive ones. The genius is already there. It always has been. So, 0, the empty circle, the place before the 5, the non-thing that makes everything else possible. We begin here, and in the next episode, we meet the first volume. The Tetrahedron is waiting. I'll see you there.